Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for Sportscentury. Jim McMahon was the easy rider of quarterbacks. He went out of his way to take the road less traveled and usually did so on his motorbike. The rebel was in him, and so was the knack for winning. McMahon took equal pleasure in defying convention and blitzes. You could force him into white tie and tails, but he'd probably wear high tops with them.
He loved to play to a camera, he loved to play to a crowd, he loved to play to the fans. And his image is what comes to mind first and foremost, not just what he was able to do on the field.
He enjoyed making people squirm, put them in situations where they were fully appalled and they don't know exactly what the next move is going to be.
Jim busted up the monotony of a long NFL season because he's so unpredictable in his day-to-day antics, whether it be wearing funky sunglasses, shaving his head into a mohawk.
He said, well, I want something different. I go, different? I go, how different? He goes, just different. I want something that's really going to make people stand up and look.
He was as zany as everyone portrayed him to be. Jim would always like to look at magazines that you wouldn't be able to buy unless you were 18 years or older.
Ditka said we had to have collars on to travel on the plane. Here comes Priest McMahon getting on the plane that week with a minister's collar.
Mac's sitting on the sideline eating a pizza. I look over for the signal, and Mac's supposed to be signaling. He's got a chunk of pizza stuck in his mouth, and he's signaling the plane.
The owner of the Eagles would use our locker room to get dressed. And McMahon yells out, "Locker rooms for players only!" And the owner turns around and says, "Sorry, Jim, I'll go get dressed in the coach's locker room."
I was actually at an interview in Las Vegas, and the reporter had a paper clip in his eyeglasses, and Jim thought it was a hidden mic. So he let the guy have it, both barrels, every obscenity you could think of. He said, then put that in your story.
He would swear at me every day at his locker. One point, I remember him turning around and blowing his nose on me. It was the first time I actually made eye contact with the guy. I'll tell you what I think. Whether you want to hear it or not, that's your problem. People don't like to hear the truth a lot. And they don't like to hear people saying what they wish they could have said. They don't have the balls to do it.
The one thing about Jim McMahon, which was his curse, and also maybe the one thing that made him tolerable, was, as obnoxious as he was unrepentant. He knows he's a jerk, and he doesn't care that you know he's a jerk, and he's not going to say, whoops, I made a mistake.
There's a lot of things that I did just for the hell of it. That's what I tried to show a lot of my teammates. It doesn't matter what you do during the week, what you do on game day.
For 15 NFL seasons, the first 7 with Chicago, Jim McMahon played quarterback with a linebacker's mentality. What diminished his game were injuries, but reduced his status among the league's old guard was a refusal to douse his fires of rebellion. During the 1985 playoffs, NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle reprimanded McMahon.
They gave me a $5,000 fine for wearing my Adidas headband, which I'd worn all year long. And they never said a word to me all year long. And it made no sense to me. So the following week, they said, you can't wear the headband, or you're going to get a bigger fine.
So Jim takes a blank headband and got his marker out, and he's putting Rozelle down on the headband, which he wore for the NFC Championship game.
I didn't know whether McMahon was going to follow the league edict or not. Sure enough, he goes out on the field, takes off his helmet, the camera zooms in, and it says Rozelle.
When the Bears landed in New Orleans for Super Bowl 20, McMahon walked onto the biggest stage of his career. But instead of basking in his own glory, the NFL's hottest extrovert found his tail rather than his whip, the object of media attention.
I got hit in the bone in the NFC Championship game, and literally my ass swelled up to one side. Was huge. I mean, it was all black. I didn't know if I was going to be able to play.
He had a camera and a helicopter flying over, so he rolled over on his back and pulled his pants down, and just lay there with his butt sticking up in the air.
3 days before the game, the media shifted its focus once more from McMahon's tail to his mouth. This time, however, it was no laughing matter.
I go down to the hotel lobby Thursday morning before the Super Bowl, about 6 o'clock, to get the papers, and I see the police there with the dogs. What is this all about? And the officer said, oh, nothing. It's just the death threats of the quarterback, the Bears.
I got woken up on Thursday morning by some irate fan that was screaming and yelling at me, saying that, you know, they're going to kill me if I leave the hotel because I just called his wife a slut or something. And I had no idea what he was talking about.
I called the radio station, and one of the night disc jockeys said, since he's been in town, all the women he met were sluts and all the men were idiots. And I said, who told you that? Where did you get that? He said, heard him say it. So I went into the newsroom, and when we went on the air at 10 o'clock, there was no verification that McMahon had said this during the morning show.
Charlie, Jim McMahon apparently on a radio interview this morning with WLS of the Chicago radio station really ripped New Orleans. He ripped the people, he ripped the ladies.
And Jim said, I didn't say that. If he said something, we felt he would have confessed up to it. He said he didn't, so we believed him, and later it turned out to be a false story.
Other times the stories were true, as McMahon said plenty to fuel his opponents.
I never feel for the other guy. And I got the crap beat out of me last week. I don't think he was feeling bad about me.
Charles Martin, really cheap shot at Jim McMahon after the interception.
When you're playing against him, not only do you want to hit him, I mean, you want to take him out of the game just for all those arrogant statements that he's made prior to the game.
He was a brutal. The man was a nutcake, but nevertheless, he got the job done. He was going to do his own thing, and he was going to win doing it.
McMahon backed up his antics with brilliant leadership on the field. This curiously American synthesis of weekday slapstick and Sunday success inspired the Mavens of Madison Avenue to shower McMahon with $3 million a year in endorsements.
He was not a particularly good role model. I remember parents said, you know, my son chews tobacco because of Jim McMahon. I'm sick of it. A guy sitting there spitting all the time. He wasn't about to say, I'm going to quit chewing tobacco because I know it's a bad image to present. Was it criminal? No. Was it irresponsible? Sure it was.
He never woke up in the morning and said, what can I do today to please everybody or make other people feel good about me? Like he cared.
I knew what the hell I was doing, like I always have. So, and I can live with that. You know, I'm not going to lose sleep over somebody thinking I'm an idiot.
Milos Raonic, the U.S. Open. Tennis action in primetime continues with the round of 16 tonight at 7 on ESPN2. Primetime presented by IBM.
I was not the model kid, that's for sure. I remember the first day of kindergarten. I was in the principal's office day one as I was sticking thumbtacks on this kid's chair that was new to the neighborhood, and I spent a lot of time there.
He was always causing trouble. Instead of taking their nap time, he'd pick up blocks and throw them in a corner. So the teacher told me, he said, I think you better take him to a psychiatrist. And so I did. And he said he's just bored with school. There's nothing wrong with Jim.
Born August 21st, 1959 in blue-collar Jersey City across the river from Manhattan, Jim was the second of 6 children to Roberta and James McMahon. When he was 3, the family moved to San Jose. At 6, a freak accident left him permanently impaired.
We were playing Cowboys and Indians, and he was wearing a holster, and there was a shoelace wrapped around his leg to hold the holster on.
I had a knot in the holster. I couldn't get it off, so I went and I got a fork, and I was trying to get the knot out with the fork, and boom! Fork slipped, and it went 2 prongs went back into my head, and severed a piece of the rat nut.
Pulled his hand down, I flipped his eye open, and I almost got sick. All I saw was red blood. So I threw him in a car and rushed him to the emergency room, and the doctor that was there looked at it, and he looked at me, and he shook his head. He says, we're going to operate right now.
McMahon was taken to a hospital and had surgery to repair his right eye.
He said, your son will have his eyesight, but he won't have complete use of it. And he'd have to wear glasses.
It always had to be dark because my eye doesn't dilate. And so since I was 6, everybody thinks, oh, he wears them because he's cool.
He wore the really thick glasses, and a lot of times he'd have the tape on the glasses in the middle because it'd be broken, and both front teeth are chipped, so it looked like a kid that would be an easy pushover.
When you go to first grade with that on, you're going to end up fighting a lot. I mean, kids are brutal. I mean, I would have been. So I fought a lot growing up just because of that.
If young Jim had it tough on the outside, life was no less a challenge in the McMahon household, where every dollar counted.
I had worked 2-3 jobs just to make sure that we had enough money to put the clothes on the children and feed them and keep the roof over their head. And it was not easy. We never had the money to go on vacation. Our vacations were spent in the backyard playing ball.
We were poor, but just like everybody else, so we didn't know we were poor. So the only thing to do when you're poor is play ball every day.
As a 9-year-old, Jimmy was starting center fielder. Could hit from both sides of the plate, and he could throw the ball 30, 40 yards as a 10-year-old.
My husband saw the talent in Jim and kind of pushed him into it. I used to say, maybe he doesn't like sports. Jim says, nope, he's going to be a quarterback.
While his father nurtured Jim's athletic talents, his mother held his behavior to an equally high standard, even if it meant a ban on sports.
When he was 12, Jimmy gets busted for smoking. He just swiped my dad's cigarettes, and he had to sit out that year of baseball. Mom put the foot down.
Jimmy was in a playoff game with the baseball team and brought home a C. And I told my husband, I said, I'm not going to let him play in the playoffs. Well, my husband, Jim, got really upset with me.
We needed him on a team, and my wife wasn't going to let him play.
I said, if you want a divorce over this, I said, it'll come to that because I don't want him playing. He has to learn that he has to keep his grades up. So Jim agreed, and we took him off the team.
I knew at the time they were right, but when you're a kid, you don't want to listen to anybody.
In 1975, after McMahon's sophomore year in high school, his family moved to rural Utah from urban San Jose.
It was a big adjustment for Jim. He moved to Utah, which was primarily a Mormon environment, and Jim hadn't grown up in any of those type of environments before. He was just a very quiet person, spent a lot of time by himself.
McMahon's success in football and baseball at Roy High School landed him a scholarship to Brigham Young in 1977. Once on campus, however, the freewheeling quarterback was out of his element.
It's kind of a cultural shock for people to come from a non-Mormon culture where having a cup of coffee or drinking or maybe being around people that smoke is no big deal. It's just part of your daily life. Back then, BYU had its honor code, which it has today, which asks athletes not to drink or to smoke or to have premarital sex.
It did take you long to get to campus and hear who Jim McMahon was, and he was supposed to be this brash, cocky, Catholic guy who on occasion would sneak a can of beer.
There's a lot of people in the Valley that don't like Jim McMahon because he sometimes would embarrass the school.
I remember t-shirts that he wore. One had a blown-up condom on it, and it said Battlestar Prophylactica. That didn't play well in Provo, let me tell you.
Be called into the dean's office and slap him on the hand and say, Jim, you can't do that down here. And then he'd turn around and do it the very next weekend.
You would have to say that he got special consideration. Some of the things that he did off the field would have been considered normal college life. But when you're in Rome, you have to do as the Romans do. And when you're in Provo, you have to do as the Mormons do.
Knowing the structure at BYU was one thing. Accepting it was another. Jim McMahon's college career was marked by a volatile mix of high moments on the field, high times off it, and a refined sense of social rebellion.
DVR service free for 1 year, and HBO and Cinemax free for 3 months. Time Warner Cable. Enjoy better.
There's this little alter ego thing going on with BYU fans to where they take a big, big amount of pride in seeing this team kick butt, score points, and break records. In the early 70s, they didn't have it. In the late 70s, they got it on the backs of quarterbacks like Mark Wilson, Gifford Nielsen.
He was following two great Mormon quarterbacks who would say the right things. You know, they look like missionaries, Gifford and Mark. They were held on a pedestal in the community.
Gifford Nielsen and Mark Wilson were two incredible quarterbacks, and that's the example that everybody thinks that you're to follow. And Jim is
fear in the opposition. He passed for 47 touchdowns and 4,500 yards as the Cougars roared back to the Holiday Bowl. At halftime, a dejected BYU team trailed SMU 29-13.
You could feel a lot of the players thinking to themselves, you know, if we could just score one more time and get out of here.
But we came after them and, quite frankly, probably got a little overconfident.
Trailing by 19 points in the fourth quarter, BYU faced a 4th and 2 near midfield.
Lavelle just sent the punting unit on the field, and Jim refused to come off the field.
What are you guys giving up? This is bull.
The guy was upset to no end. And so it's okay, go back in, we'll go for it.
There's been a time when you were in a game with Jim McMahon, when he was in the huddle, that you didn't feel that we were going to win this thing. He just made you feel like that there was always a chance.
After throwing 2 incompletions, McMahon sucked it up and pulled a play straight out of his Sandlot days.
I got in the huddle and just said, look, you know, you guys give me a little time and you guys get your asses down the end zone and somebody catches the ball.
3rd and 10 at the SMU 41-yard line. McMahon all the way back in his own 46, throwing for the end zone.
I just kept looking up and kept running, kept looking up and kept running.
McMahon's Hail Mary capped a 446-yard, 4-touchdown performance, with 203 of those yards coming after he took the reins from his coach. The Cougars finished 12-1 and were ranked 12th. In his All-American senior year, he again led the nation in passing. Meanwhile, McMahon's equally active off-field activities were racking up points on the debit side. Following a second consecutive Holiday Bowl victory in 1981, he was presented with a laundry list of complaints.
I was on probation pretty much my whole time there. I got called into the Sanders office, and the guy was sitting there saying, I've got a list of people here that have all these allegations against you, and I'd done some of them, sure, but there was a bunch of things I had no idea what they were talking about.
I think in the end, there were some people at the university that were very concerned, and Jim loved to needle them. He loved to put it to them. And I think that they maybe overreacted, which is probably what you'd expect.
The Sanders basically said, you're no longer here at the school, you're pretty much done. And it just happened to coincide with my eligibility running out.
That may be some type of paranoia. You know, here's a Catholic kid in the middle of the Mormons, they're after me. But honestly, I can't recall a concerted effort to boot him out.
I don't know if the fans have ever accepted him to this day. He wrote some rather disparaging things about his stay here in Provo. The line that I remember was, the best thing about Provo was seeing it in his rearview mirror.
Series premiere Sunday, September 30th on ABC.
Here's first round selection, Jim McMahon, quarterback, Brigham Young.
McMahon was due to arrive at Hallis Hall. And a limousine came up, and somebody said, that must be the new quarterback. He stepped out of the limo with a can of beer in his hand. And that was the arrival of Jim McMahon with the Chicago Bears.
Hallis opens up the negotiations, and he says, you don't have peripheral vision in that one eye. He says, I think we're entitled to a discount.
He told me, for one, you're too short, you got a bad knee, you don't see very good. He says, maybe you ought to just go to Canada. And I said, why the hell did you draft me?
I think that McMahon reminded George Hallis of a young punk named George Hallis.
The 5th overall selection wasn't the Bears' only rookie with an attitude in 1982. There was also a new head coach, Mike Ditka.
I don't think there was a football team or a locker room or a field big enough to accommodate the personalities and egos of Mike Ditka and Jim McMahon.
McMahon was the best quarterback for that team, and Iron Mike, sort of the antithesis of the punky QB. Even though Ditka and McMahon are really very similar, maybe sometimes got a little too close for both of them.
Certainly there were some explosions on the sideline with he and Mike, and somebody sent a play in, and then he'd say, you know, screw that, we're not running that, we're going to run this, and it would work.
One game, Mike and Jim really went at each other. Jim had changed the play, and Mike had said, don't change the play. And Jim goes, well, the defense was different. I had to change the play.
He wanted to be in charge of everything, and at times it wasn't the right way, I felt.
I never did try to control it because Jim McMahon wouldn't have paid one bit of attention to what I said. If I'd have said, don't run, he would have ran. I said, slide, he would have jumped over people. Didn't matter. There's no point getting into that.
Jim was young, and he was a winner. Now, if they were an uneven team and they lost a lot, well, I don't think Ditka would have tolerated it. But I think Ditka was smart enough to know, get out of the way.
I think they were really good for each other. I think they fueled each other's fire.
In McMahon's first 2 seasons, the Bears failed to break 500 as Ditka's old-school strategy relied on the legs of Walter Payton rather than the arm of McMahon.
After playing in the offense I played in and then having to come to Chicago and deal with this offense wasn't very much fun. So I had to do something to amuse myself.
He would run downfield and headbutt people. You know, after great plays, just let's go have fun. Let's kick ass on the field and off the field.
He just happened to be a real blue-collar quarterback. His buddies were the grunt guys. He never separated himself, regardless of the notoriety he got.
He liked hanging out with us, and he realized that for the team to be close, that he needed to hang out with us.
I think that's why he played. It wasn't necessarily the championships or the records. It was because I'm most comfortable being with my boys, playing football, having fun, eating, drinking, running around, being crazy.
Those guys would have did anything to protect Jim McMahon. He didn't play the game like a quarterback. He didn't have any respect for his body. He played the game with reckless abandon.
I don't think it ever took a safe slide like you see the quarterbacks today. Is that smart? Probably not. But does that win? You bet. And that's Jim McMahon.
The inevitable happened against the Raiders in 1984.
His kidney was lacerated by a hit and came back to the huddle and tried to call the next play. And the players knew he could hardly breathe, let alone talk.
He says, I can't breathe. I can't get my breath. And kind of wheezing. He's bent over a little bit. Guy can't stand up, so something's wrong. So we just sent him out.
With their gutsy leader sidelined, the Bears fell short of their first Super Bowl, shut out by the 49ers for the 1984 NFC Championship. After starting the first 2 games of the next season, McMahon was back on the bench with another injury. Trailing the Vikings 17-9, he shrugged off the pain and set the tone for the season.
I'm looking at our guys' faces coming off the field. You know, they're beat. I mean, they were done. I'm saying, look, Mike, we're gonna lose this game, man. Yeah, you better put me in. We're gonna lose.
He's, I think, trying to get in the way of Mike Ditka every way he can. Hey, Coach, what do you think?
And finally, you know, he drove me nuts halftime in the third quarter. I put him in, and evidently Minnesota thought he couldn't throw the ball too, because they come with an all-out blitz.
Dewey in motion to the left side. Vikings coming on a blitz. McMahon back to throw. Hurls it deep down the middle. Willie goes. Is out there. Makes the over-the-shoulder catch of the 30 to the 25, 20, 15, 10, 5. Touchdown!
The very next play, he throws a touchdown to Dennis McKinnon. And then the very next series, he throws another touchdown to Dennis McKinnon. And we went on to win the game, of course. And I think for the first time, we as a team knew the Super Bowl was really, really a reality.
They wanted to hear about Jim. They wanted to hear about Fridge, Walter, Samurai. I mean, we had a cast of characters that it really hasn't been duplicated since.
It seemed like every single starting player and some of the scrubs had either a radio show, a TV show, or a restaurant, or all 3.
You saw people without their helmets. You saw personalities, and you saw people singing and dancing and having fun.
We had a bunch of characters who had a lot of character. That's where I've always defined our guys. And you don't very seldom get to see that until a team wins.
The 85 Bears exploded a lot of myths about sports, that you have to be working together as a team and you have to, be quiet and not say the wrong things and not offend people and not be too cocky or too arrogant.
You would think that many different personalities, well, there ain't no way this team's gonna mix.
Believe me, the 45 guys we had didn't like each other, very jealous until Sunday. Then we played because we had to win, but off the field, we didn't like each other. But Jim was the leader, and whatever Jim said, we would do.
McMahon steps up. Now he'll take himself. Cutting up to the 15 to the 10. May go all the way to the 5. Touchdown over there. Touchdown!
After the 15-1 Bears powered past the Giants and Rams in the playoffs, McMahon landed in New Orleans with the force of a hurricane.
Jim McMahon took control of Super Bowl 20 like no player has ever taken control of a Super Bowl, with the possible exception of Joe Namath.
Everyone made sure that they talked to McMahon. They wanted to be there in case he said something really crazy.
A lot of guys just refine what they do, or they do it behind closed doors. Well, McMahon didn't do that. He never did that. He was just going to be who he was, and if it meant going out on Bourbon Street late at night because that's what he was going to do, he was going to do it.
We were having a really good time. We ate great restaurants. We had some laughs and drinks, and we'd always see some of the Patriots going in around 11 o'clock every night, you know. And we're out there going, oh, you guys, we're going to kick your ass. We'd just be hammered.
As McMahon's nightly parade through the Big Easy approached game time, the question of headbands resurfaced as the national media wondered whether its favorite rebel would defy Rozell's ban on forehead advertising.
I got sent probably hundreds of different headbands. I ended up picking all charities, you know, like the Children's Miracle Network, the POW one went over great.
Pluto, he's into outer space. Well, that only figures.
He wore a headband that said Pluto on it. And people at the time thought, why is he wearing this headband with Pluto? Well, it was really a tribute to one of his friends who was a BYU football player.
My buddy had just gotten over his brain tumor, and so wanted him to let him know I was thinking about him.
McMahon fakes the handoff, rolls, touchdown. All right.
With the Patriots focused on stopping Peyton, McMahon threw for 256 yards and was the first quarterback to run for 2 touchdowns in the Super Bowl. The Bears rolled 46-10.
Mike Ditka being hoisted on the shoulders of his team. The Chicago Bears are world champions of football.
I don't care how great Walter Payton was. I don't care how great our defense was. We don't win the Super Bowl without McMahon, period.
Canadian Milos Raonic, the U.S. Open. Tennis action in primetime continues with the round of 16 tonight at 7 on ESPN2. Primetime presented by IBM.
In 1986 in training camp, there was quite a to-do about the fact that Jim McMahon showed up with quite the paunch. And here it was, they just won the Super Bowl. And he looked like he enjoyed himself an awful lot in the offseason.
Jim was in so many commercials that players thought it was taken away from his preparation to the game on Sunday.
Jim McMahon decided that he was going to advance his persona, and whether anybody liked it or not. In '85, it worked. But after '85, he was part of the demise of this team.
In 1986, in an autobiography entitled McMahon, the quarterback fired a scattergun barrage at his parents, BYU's administration, his teammates, his coach, and Bears management.
When his autobiography came out, that was the beginning of the end for Jim McMahon as the Chicago Bears quarterback.
When this came out, everybody's thinking, this is a dynasty, and here comes Jim McMahon saying, I don't have much faith in our boss, Michael McCaskey. I'm afraid he will ruin it, because I don't trust him a whole lot.
I remember closing the book, looking around at him and going, man, it was nice playing with you.
We've always tried to stay focused on the contribution that he can make to the football team and not let other things distract us.
I didn't like Mike McCaskey. I still don't like him. I don't know anybody that does. So, you know, I just said, well, you know, I think what had to be said.
He criticized his own teammates. He said that Willie Gault needed to focus more on football and less on trying to be an actor. What quarterback's ever going to say that about his leading receiver?
I understand what he said in the book. That never bothered me, but it bothered some other people in the organization, especially the owner. See, Jim didn't have any regard for that. He didn't care what he said really about anybody. He just said it.
With an off-injured McMahon on his way to playing just 6 games in 1986, the Bears signed Doug Flutie as insurance.
The day we signed Flutie, McMahon showed up with a 22 jersey on and little bitty shoulder pads and stuff.
Jim saw Doug as another project for Mike. He came into a situation where no one really wanted him there but Mike.
Mike Ditka loved me as a quarterback and as an athlete and as a person, all that. And Jim maybe felt a little threatened by that. But the other factor of it was he felt that His buddies at the time, Steve Fuller and Mike Tomczak, should have gotten that opportunity instead of me.
I think Mike just needed somebody else for his circus. You know, he had me the nut, he had Fridge, the fat guy, and he needed a midget. So we went and got Flutie.
That's where McMahon became very petty. That's where the Bears began to tear apart. And you have to ask yourself, why is somebody that petulant at that point in time?
Jim, for whatever reason, was trying to make things a little difficult on me, and it was his team, so those guys are going to follow his direction.
He didn't talk to Doug. He polarized the offensive line. They didn't talk to Doug.
It wasn't like we were mortal enemies. I was more backing my friends, Steve Fuller and Mike Tomczak, because I figured they deserved a shot before the new kid that comes in.
There was a tremendous arrogance about Doug Flutie then. He was not a fan favorite. He was not a team favorite.
We had a certain identity and a certain chemistry in the locker room, and when you bring an outsider in, he's not going to penetrate that circle.
Led by their defense, the Bears went 14-2 and won their third straight division title. But with Flutie at quarterback, Chicago suffered a stunning home playoff loss to Washington.
Once we lost that ball game, those guys could say to Ditka, see, I told you so, we lost. It's your fault. You shouldn't have been playing. That wasn't the reason we lost the ball game.
If Jim had taken Flutie under his wing and tutored him, we could have won another Super Bowl. Well, he wouldn't do it. And that's where he and I kind of parted ways.
McMahon had missed 23 games due to injury over his first 5 seasons. The reckless abandon style was catching up with him. And as the injuries mounted, some within ranks, namely defensive tackle Dan Hampton, turned on him.
I think that what vexes Dan Hampton, and maybe a few of the other guys too, is that if McMahon had been healthy more often, that they would have won more than they did.
Dan Hampton was the Jim McMahon of the defense. He was loud and brash, and while some of those guys on the defensive line just did their work and were quiet about it, Dan always spoke out.
Hampton was a guy who was always going out there on the field and playing when he was half dead, and he questioned why McMahon wasn't doing the same.
He did get hurt a lot, and maybe he could have rehabbed better. I just know when he was out there, he was giving it his all and doing whatever he could to win the game.
There were some altercations verbally that took place. We sputtered a little bit on offense over the next couple of years, and defense carried us. And maybe Dan was the spokesperson for the defense to finally say, we're fed up with this.
We'd always gotten along pretty well, I thought, until '86 is when I hurt my shoulder. For them to then question me 2 years later, that was a little frustrating.
Losing home playoff games again in 1987 and '88, the Bears' emerging dynasty was over before McMahon turned 30.
I think if Jim could have stayed healthy, we probably would have won at least 2 to 3 more Super Bowls.
He was a tragic figure, just like Chicago is in certain ways. He could get the Bears to that Super Bowl one time, and after that it was all might have been, could have been, should have, and didn't.
NFL on ESPN, where fans go for football.
It was coming to a head, but it was still a shock because Jim McMahon, this icon, this local legend, was to be no more a Chicago Bear.
Ditka and I didn't speak at all during training camp, but I figured something was going on, and I guess I was right. Now I don't have to deal with that anymore, and I'm very relieved. I feel sorry for the rest of the guys who got to put up with it.
With San Diego, McMahon struggled in 1989, throwing as many interceptions as touchdown passes.
That was frustrating. That was probably one of the worst years of my professional career.
Your off-the-field behavior gets different scrutiny when you're losing. It might have flown in Chicago because they were a winning team, but it didn't work in San Diego.
He allowed this image, this thing that had gotten him where he got, consume him. I think it started to tear down the great things that he had done.
I was happy when he left the team because he wasn't really fitting in. He was the amended version of Jim McMahon when he was in San Diego.
Rosenstein's transformation. So if you would like to feel like you did 20 years ago, call or go online now.
I always admired him. I learned to play by watching him. I watched him drop. I watched him throw. I'm grateful in so many ways for Jim that he doesn't even probably realize.
I think that Jim McMahon is the quintessential player whose mind was so adept at the game of football and his body just failed him. And we're not talking like the guy was 50, in his early 30s. He knew the game so well. He could read defenses so well.
Subsequently, when other teams would sign him, they were doing that to try to catch that glimmer of the past. But the body always broke down.
After one season in San Diego, McMahon bounced through the league. Eagles, Vikings, Cardinals, Browns, and Packers, mostly as a backup.
In Cleveland, McMahon had to be carried up the steps and set on the field. And I thought, how much mobility can a guy have? He can't walk up 3 steps. He threw for 317 yards and 3 touchdown passes, and they won. Everybody admired him for playing hurt, and he had a way of making everybody laugh and keeping everybody really loose. And because of that, he was an extremely popular guy.
The 10 Commandments had been on like 2 nights before, and we're 5 minutes before kickoff, and everybody's sitting in front of the lockers, full garb. You look over, and there's a big table in the middle of the room, and Mac's standing on top of it in a full Yul Brynner stance, and here comes Rich Kotite, and the coaches are coming out for their pregame address. And Mac looks down at Kotite, and he says, "Come to me no more, Richie, but the day I see your face again, you will surely die."
I don't think a Super Bowl ring was that important to him. He'd already had one. I don't think that money was a big factor. I think he just enjoyed the game.
McMahon retired after the 1996 season with a second Super Bowl ring, having been Brett Favre's backup. After 15 injury-plagued campaigns, he went home to his wife Nancy and their 4 children.
He said that when he was done playing football, he wanted to do nothing but hang around the house, play golf, travel with Nancy and the kids. That's exactly what he's doing.
His family was important to him. His teammates were important to him. He had a goal at home with his children to discipline them and to bring them up the right way.
They want to believe the image of him as this, crazy, punky QB type person, because that's maybe the more exciting side of him.
He does the laundry, he gets the mail, he sits at the desk and goes through his planner, and he just keeps to himself, and he's not as crazy as everyone thinks.
I loved him like a brother. If he was a fan of yours or a supporter of yours, he'd be right there with you. As long as I live, I'm always going to have a special place in my heart for Jim.
I think if there was anything about him, it was that he was honest. Some of us didn't always appreciate it and didn't like it, but he was consistently himself.
We'd have 3 foursomes, and he'd make us all play together, 12 guys on a hole. And then people, the marshal, would be like, "You can't do that." And then he'd play with just shorts and no shirt, no shoes, no socks, no nothing, just shorts.
He was a jerk as a young man. He was a jerk as a pro football star. In a lot of ways, he's a jerk now. And if a jerk can have some charm, I guess he does.
I don't think McMahon ever really wanted people to know him. He had this image that he wanted to perpetuate, and I think he did that successfully. He just was a guy who wanted to leave his mark, both in terms of his accomplishments on the field and his antics off of it.
Growing up, I wanted to be a professional athlete. I accomplished that. Didn't want to have a job. Accomplished that. Now I just want to have a good time. Just play golf, enjoy life, and watch my kids grow up. Hopefully they'll do better than I did.
Jim McMahon had the gift. Though he never threw more than 15 touchdown passes in a season, he won 69% of his NFL starts. Often it was because he could make it up as he went along. He wasn't a fan of film sessions and even less of practices. What he wanted to do was play. Football preferably, but if he had another game, well, Easy Rider was always game. For SportsCentury, I'm Chris Fowler.